It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today it is going to be all about TKO, UFC, Zuffa boxing, the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act, the UFC antitrust cases, you name it, we're talking about it. But before we get into all of that, I would recommend that you pick up a paid subscription so that you have access to all of the things we're going to be talking about today. Because if you're a longtime listener, you already know that about half of the show will be behind a paywall. So if you're new here, pick up that paid subscription. Now, John, how the heck are you? We only had one show last week, so we wanted to give an early show this week and maybe a special one later on in the week.
Yeah, I'm in hopes that I'll have an interview with John Fitch this week to talk about. That was someone asked us to do that, recommended it, and we were thinking about before. So he wanted us to talk to John Fitch about the settlement and the additional lawsuits to get like an OG of the lawsuits POV. So that's what we're hoping to do this week. We'll have to recontact him to see if he's available. But beyond that, I guess I'm just like everybody else in mourning over Chuck Norris passing away.
Yeah, that's a thing. And
I don't know if you remember this, but for about a decade, I cut all not all, but a lot of the Total Gym commercials and infomercials.
Do you want to know something crazy? And I'll take a picture of it later. We have a Total Gym.
You do? Look at that. Look at the advertising works.
Well, here's the thing. What's beautiful about the Total Gym is when rowing machines came out and they were like $5,000 a piece, you could get a Total Gym and basically have a rowing machine. So
yeah. Dude, that's what it's a Total Gym. You can do it for all that stuff. But yeah, Chuck was, I wasn't like friends with him or anything, but politically probably on the opposite end of the spectrum as me. But I will say any interaction stuff, the guy came across as really nice. So, yeah, and his family was super nice too. So
I will say this, I have many, many fond martial arts memories of Chuck from watching a zillion of his movies. I loved watching Chuck Norris movies. I'm not even going to lie. I loved all that cheese.
Less for me, because as much as I watched a lot of his movies, The Rage, Good Guys Wear Black, The Octagon, Invasion USA, I watched all those movies. I was not, even as a kid, I was not a massive fan of those movies. I was much more a Charles Bronson guy.
Oh, I was obsessed with all martial arts because I loved Kung Fu Theater. I loved Bruce Lee, Chuck Norris, listen, anything martial arts, I loved it. So, I talked my parents into letting me take Taekwondo. And so I took Taekwondo for 2 years when I was a teenager. From 13 to 15, I took Taekwondo. So, yeah, I could do a full kata from memory still. So, yeah.
Listen, I read Black Belt magazine. I was into the martial arts junk. I took karate at a young age. We went and saw The Octagon in the theaters. We were so excited just because the outfits, the ninja, gear, movie blue. So I just could not. The problem is I'm too into movies, and even when I'm into that stuff, the magazines and the toy, buying shurikens and nunchucks as a kid, I can't get past shitty movies. And goddamn, most American martial arts movies, especially that period, were awful for the most part.
But what about Return of the Dragon, though? That was so cool.
There's that. I liked a lot of Bruce Lee movies. I liked a lot of the Hong Kong stuff, but again, the American movies were, what's one I did like as a kid, and I'm afraid to watch it again. My Name is Bruce. Remember that comedy where the guy's thinks he's Bruce Lee?
Yes.
I am really terrified to watch it again because I got a feeling it's terrible, but I remember as a kid really liking it.
Well, I'm going to make a movie recommendation to you today. I'm going to recommend that you go see Project Hail Mary because it is absolutely phenomenal. We're going to see it again because we didn't get to see it in IMAX. And so now I want to see it in IMAX, but it is so stinking good. Oh my God. I mean, I was sobbing at like 3 different points in the movie and then extremely elated for most of the movie because it really has an uplifting message. And you know what? We stinking need that right now because, man, the entire world is just falling apart. And
well, we'll be talking about the world falling apart today, I'm sure, a little bit.
Yeah. So, anyways,
I will tell you, no, I got to go see that movie. Yeah, I had no interest before, but high on my list now. The word of mouth, the ad campaign has been successful because I did not think it would do well, and now it's going gangbusters. So, good.
And it's
hats
worth
off
it,
to
though.
them.
You know what? I've gotten a feel for the kind of movie that you like. I promise you'll like it. It's really, really good. I was absolutely blown away, and I wasn't expecting to be blown away by it. But
I'm sure it's no Last Summer at Marenbau.
Huh?
I'm sure it's no Last Summer at Marenbau.
Well, I'll tell you this.
La Ventura, is it like that? I bet you it's not like that. So we'll see.
It's fantastic. It's better than The Martian, and I love The Martian.
Okay, well, I'm not sure it's my cup of tea, this movie, but I'm sure I'll like it. I'm sure it'll be,
The acting is superb. Ryan Gosling is really good. They didn't use green screens at all. They used a real puppet so that he would not be acting against a green screen, and it translates better. Like the emotion that he goes through at several points in the movie, like you believe it. It's so good. I can't rave about it.
Okay, you don't have to sell to me anymore. I plan on seeing it.
Okay, you better. All right, so let's get down to brass tacks. Everybody here that's been listening for a while knows that we always start with any updates that might have happened in the UFC antitrust cases. So, John, do we have anything new this week?
Well, I mean, there's one filing that came in. That it's not, I wouldn't say it's super important, but it's worth noting because it's the only thing that came in. There was an amended protective order that was filed March 17th last week. I don't know what day that was exactly. And it governed how the confidential information is going to be handled across the 3 related antitrust cases. And again, I'll summarize the 3 cases. I'll just their names, new listeners. There's 3 current antitrust cases against the UFC. They're all somewhat related. They pick up where the Lee v. Zuffa case, the case that was settled, ends. They are Johnson v. Zuffa, which represents all fighters that fought in the UFC from July 1st, 2017 till now, except for those that signed the arbitration agreements and class action waivers. They're represented by a case called Serkinov v. Zuffa, which looks to challenge those waivers. And then finally, there's a case called Davis v. Zuffa, named after Phil Davis, that looks to represent fighters outside the UFC in recent years. So those are the 3 potential class action lawsuits that allege anti-competitive practice against the UFC. So what the order does, it's meant to establish a framework for protecting the sensitive documents exchanged during discovery. So it creates 2 tiers of protection. There's a confidential for general sensitive business or personal information, and then there's a highly confidential, attorney's eyes only, for extremely sensitive, non-public information or private medical personal data with non-plaintiff athletes. So it's stuff that people just in their personal life don't want. You don't want their social security numbers. You don't want their personal medical records, things like that. That's that highly confidential. So some of the key provisions in it. Any discovery material produced in any of the 3 cases can be used across all 3 cases, which is kind of key. Since they're related, they want to share the discovery material, make it easier. At the beginning, at some point, Zuffa challenged that, but they've conceded now. I think the judge just to simplify it. The parties must carefully and selectively designate documents. Mass or indiscriminate designations are prohibited, and according to the courts, can result in sanctions. So they got to be careful of that. There is a process laid out for challenging confidential designation. So it requires a good faith meet and confer before they want the judge or the court to intervene. If protected material is subpoenaed in another case, the receiving party must notify the designated party before producing it. I think this relates to the material that was introduced regarding Ari Emanuel and his Signal chat from the WWE case. People remember there's a lawsuit against the WWE about their merger with the UFC. Basically, shareholders are suing them because they don't think they got the best price. And it was revealed in that case that Ari was communicating with Vince McMahon because they had messages on Vince McMahon's phone, but they were not on Ari's, meaning they were set to delete. And that stuff should have been handed over into the UFC antitrust cases, but wasn't. And so the plaintiffs, they got a hold of the material that was released to the public from that case and introduced it. I think the defense got upset about that. So now the judge is saying, if you're going to use stuff from other cases, you just got to notify them ahead of time. Confidentiality obligations survive the end of the litigation. So any confidentiality extends past the litigation. And then I guess the final one was within 60 days of final disposition. Parties must return to destroy all protected material and certify they've done so. So they can't hang on to those protected material. And this was, of course, not signed by Judge Boulware. This came out of the U.S. magistrate, Judge Wexler. That's it. That's the magistrate for this case. So that's during their conferences they're having to negotiate this stuff. They go to the magistrate instead of Boulware. So that is the only update we got this week. It's been kind of slow the last couple of weeks. So we are waiting for some prima donna material, some hot top material, some good Maui Wowie type substance. We don't have that yet, and I got a feeling it might not come till the end of April to the next status conference when we might see more activity.
Well, all right. Let's move on then to the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act, because you reported this, a new version of it will be put forth for a vote this week. What day are they voting, and is it a done deal that it passes?
Well, this week, if you look at the congressional weekly schedule, you notice that there's no Congress is not in session. At least the House of Representatives is not in session on Monday. So on Tuesday, they're in session. They are not starting. They're meeting late that day at 2 p.m. For legislative business, and then votes are supposedly going to be postponed until 6:30 p.m. So we probably won't get votes to the end of the day. They have a list of bills that day that are going to be considered under suspension of the rules, which is a term where they limit debate, no more than 40 minutes of debate per bill, that there can be no amendments produced for the bill, but they need 2/3 of the House to vote for it to pass. So they have a long list of bills they're going to try to get through on Tuesday. And one of them, the first one listed on the website, is H.R. 4624, the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act. And so the plan, I guess, is Tuesday we should expect it to be introduced. Tuesday we should expect it to be to vote on it. And then that's what, we'll be following it. But it looks like that's the day it's going to happen. And it looks like, I don't think they would introduce it under this format if they didn't expect it to pass. Let's put it that way.
How long do they get to debate it?
Well, 40 minutes maximum. That's it. That's all they get. And I doubt they might not take that long at all.
All right. I did mention that this was a new version that you noted. What are the changes that you happen to notice from the previous version?
Well, there wasn't a ton of changes on this. I was shocked to see there were some changes because there had been no notification that they were going to do any amendments. In fact, they had posted the previous one that came out of markup as kind of the current version, and then just out of nowhere, they submitted this new version that's going to be the one they're voting on. And so my guess is that some people realize that they put in some really stupid shit in the bill. There's a lot of stupid shit, but some particularly stupid shit that was going to have the opposite impact that they thought. Kind of shows you how little debate, a little investigation, how little informed Congress, the House of Representatives, is about this bill. That material was added that they thought was to benefit fighters, boxers. In fact, if you remember, the minority party submitted on those kind of that report about the bill, they submitted some improvements they made to the bill, and they seemed kind of happy in that. And you're like, well, those improvements were obviously terrible because you secretly pulled them out. And so some of the changes these are the current changes from the previous bill. So I'm not going to go through the entire bill since we've talked that before. Maybe if it passes, maybe we'll do an episode again going through what this final version of all the elements mean. But the changes between this version and the last time we reported on it, there are a few. One is there is a title match versus title bout changed. The previous version, every time they talked about it, the previous version called them title bouts. Now they've changed. Every time they talk about a title bout, they have it referred to as title match. I'm not sure why the terminology has been changed. I don't know. It seems like a difference with no apparent substantive effect. So I don't know what's the reasoning behind. Potentially there's some regulation in certain states or somewhere else that's important, and that's why they made that change. But I'm just noting they made the change. They no longer call them title bouts; they call them title matches. There's also, this was a big change. The previous version added a floor for random testing, and that is now absent from this new version. The previous version said, and I'm going to read from it, it talks about drug testing. And it says you have to drug test all title bouts in the previous version, not title matches, which they changed, and at random for all other bouts, provided that tests are administered for not less than 50% of such other bouts. So that's what it said on the February 17th version. The newest version, or February 25th, sorry. The newest version that came out within the week, it dropped the provided that tests are administered for not less than 50% of such other bouts. So it says you have to drug test title bouts and at random for other bouts, and then it ends. That's the provision ends. And so what I think happened here, and this is just me theorizing because we have nothing that informs us of why this was changed. That original drug test provision, which applies to not just UBOs, but all promoters, all entities in, America, was introduced by apparently a Democrat. It was a way for them to improve the bill. I think what they did is they said, drug testing is good. Let's do something to improve this bill. Let's have even more drug testing. And everybody will like that. And then someone went up to him and said, you are going to kill club shows if you make them do drug tests on 50% of the fighters on a card. There's no way they can afford it. As we've talked about, as we've seen, Boxer Insider did a whole article of how it's just unrealistic. As we know from the ABC Athletic Commission hearing they had after this bill this markup was introduced, they had an emergency meeting and people were freaking out. So someone obviously spoke to them, and they changed this to get rid of that because it would kill club shows. It's going to be amusing to see some people on Twitter that were supporting the version that would have killed club shows because they think it's great, now supporting it even more because it's been taken out. But it's good that someone got through to them and they took this out, because now what I think it does is it basically leaves it up to the state athletic commissioner of how many bouts they want to test at random on event cards. And since none are given, some states could decide or decide for some promoters that we are not going to require them to test any of the bouts, which obviously is much more affordable to some of the promoters. So that's the other change. And then finally, this is I think the last one I just said probably had the biggest impact on the bill, the biggest impact on boxing. But this one is probably the biggest substantive difference. In other words, the biggest change overall in the tax and the impact of the bill itself. The two versions set up a baseline drug screening that are very different now. The version that came out in February, the markup version, that version defaults to WADA prohibited list as the baseline and allows a boxing commission to opt out of screening for a specific substance only if that substance is not prohibited under state law or by the tribal group if it's on a tribal land. The new version uses a tiered hierarchy. So it screens for substance prohibited by the state boxing commission or tribal organization first. If none are so prohibited, then it screens for the substance prohibited by the Association of Boxing Commissions. And only if the ABC also prohibits it, then it defaults to the WADA list. So it has a hierarchy you still have to go through. Probably, in some ways it's probably more intense. It covers more things, but that's the biggest difference. So the changes really are majority are through, again, title match for title versus title bout. I'm not sure why that was changed, but they made that change. The minimum threshold for random drug testing was changed, the drug screening standard. And then there's one minor thing would be there's a cross reference in the UBO anti-doping section. And this is just technical because of the change above. The cross reference now cites a different section of the bill because this tiered section adds an additional section that has to be cross-referenced on the UBO portion. And so that are the changes they made. They're not a ton of changes, some very big. But the changes, the drug testing we got to be somewhat thankful for they did that because that was, there's still some club shows are going to struggle, I think, with the $50,000 insurance. We've known from some state athletic commissions from the ABC meeting, they do not think some of their promoters will be able to meet that. But that's not as big a hurdle, I think, as the drug testing, which really even for more successful promoters, that would have added just a cost they couldn't overcome. So it's good that they made that change. The thing is, though, that the other problems that we have with the bill that we've talked on the show, that listeners are aware of, the idea that a UBO can basically skirt all the protections of the Ali Act, that it's given a waiver for that it also that coercive contracts can be used by UBOs, that those things are still in there, and it also still has all the sanctioning organization stuff, namely that, which I wouldn't mind if they've just focused on that, tell you the truth. It has one, the sanctioning organizations can only have one championship per weight class, which is, if it goes through and enforced, it's going to be a massive impact on sanctioning organizations that, if you follow boxing, not only do they have like interim championship and regular champions and super champions and silver champions, but then they have the regional champions like the North American and the Caribbean and the Latin American and Europe. So that'll be a major impact on sanctioning organizations. It also has a rule that changes one section of the original bill where that the sanctioned organizations can only be compensated for their fees they charge. They can't get additional compensation where there was some allowance of that in the original bill, which theoretically, if you read the report, should kill the idea of them getting tickets for the events, which would probably hurt the sanctioning organization. So that's still in there. So it's still got some big changes. It's still got the worst thing, I think, is the UBO, the whole UBO structure. But it did, I guess, give them hats off. They recognized they did one really stupid thing and put in the drug testing on the club shows and did something to unwind that, or to not enforce that.
But we still have 6-year contracts in there.
Yeah, well, again, the thing about the 6-year contract is currently under federal regulation, there's no limit to how long a boxing contract can be. And promoters could theoretically make contracts that extend and be 7-8 years, just like the UFC has done. And so you're like, well, at least they finally put in a limit to the 6-year contract. That is, finally there's an actual limit. The problem I have with it, the 6-year limit, is that, okay, great. Now you have a limit, a maximum duration for a contract, but it's so freaking long. It's much longer than most contracts are. It's longer than what California currently limits. It's longer than what New York limits their contracts at. And my concern is, in some ways, is that it'll become the standard. Such a lengthy contract. It'll be looked at. If other states want to limit contracts, they'll look at that. If perhaps we go to injunctive relief in one of the UFC antitrust cases, maybe the UFC cites that and the judge decides 6-year contracts are appropriate for the length of a contract, which would be, god awful. But it is really one of the stupidest things they put in the bill. You could argue, oh, finally there's a limit, but it's a limit that's well beyond the standard in some states. And it's also, again, if you read the legislative history, if you read the discussions when they passed the Ali Act, promoter, sanctioner, manager, everything discussed in the past when they passed the original Ali Act, that long-term contracts are terrible. In fact, a lot of guys argued contracts should not be more than 2 or 3 years maximum. And yet here they find a 6-year maximum contract, which according to Pat English, which no reason not to believe. In fact, I do believe them. The reason they settled on 6-year contract seems to be that, the Olivia de Havilland rule in California is 7 years for actors and stuff. Let's do it 1 year less, 6 years.
So dumb.
Never mind that an actor's career is fucking a lot longer than a boxer's.
Yeah, Olivia de Havilland was acting all the way into her 80s. Jesus.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is, I guess in the modern era, maybe they expect boxers to be boxing in old age like Tyson.
So we might have an end to alphabet soup because all of the things that John was talking about with the many, many, many titles that sanctioning organizations come up with is collectively known by boxing fans and pundits as alphabet soup. So we might have some relief to that, though.
Yeah, but again, we've talked about this before, and I get on my high horse here, is that they didn't do any of the stuff that coming out of the Ali Act hearings, the original, that Congress decided should be added to the Ali Act to improve it. If they wanted to fix the rankings and sanctioning organizations, the Ali Act, the people behind it suggested that the Congress come up with their own rating system, basically, and compel the sanctioning organizations to use that. They wanted a contractual standard, minimum standards for contracts for promoters and boxers, and what they were discussing would have been obviously shorter than 6 years, right? So all these things that were introduced, or not introduced, but discussed as the next step that we have to take the bill to take boxing to add on to it as Congress was ignored, and instead they introduced a bunch of shit that it's obviously designed for TKO's benefit.
Man. All right. So what comes next?
Well, next, I guess we got to imagine this passes on Tuesday. I'll be shocked if it doesn't. I don't think they introduced the bill to be voted on by 2/3 majority if they don't assume the votes are in the bag. And so it gets passed. Then the next step, it has to go to the Senate. My guess, the word on the street, is that Senator Ted Cruz from your state, will introduce it, a version of it. It might be someone else, but that's the person that's been suggested. Most likely, Ted Cruz introduces the bill. I'm going to guess it's going to be identical language of what comes out of the House of Representatives. And the reason is, if they can pass it with the identical language without any amendments, then there's no reconciliation. It doesn't have to go back to the two chambers to settle on what the difference is between the two versions. It can just go directly to President Trump's desk, where it will probably be very quickly signed. The question is, can they move it at a fast pace through the Senate? That's the big question, because the rules there are ways to introduce bills directly to the floor to bypass, the debates and stuff, but it's pretty hard to do in the Senate. I mean, you got to get unanimous consent agreement to fast track most bills, or you got to get a unanimous consent agreement on debates. You don't debate. And as much as I think a lot of Democrats probably aren't following this bill, don't care, maybe have already been convinced by TKO's lobbyists to support it, you have to think someone like a Bernie Sanders or someone, Elizabeth Warren, there's some Democrat in there you think would put a halt to it being fast-tracked through the Senate. So I think there'll be some debate, but if there is no debate, it could get introduced within a month and get, passed immediately and get returned to the president's desk. So it's law then a month after it's being signed. So that's a possibility. Or it could be introduced and there is some sort of committee hearing, some sort of debate, in which case it'll probably take several months like it did. Not as long as it took the House. There'll probably be some pressure to push it forward, but that still means there'd be several months in the Senate before it could possibly go to vote, which would slow it down a little bit. But, odds are at the same time still, you have to assume that they think they have the votes for this, that there's just not there's not the pushback, there's not the opposition, there's just frankly not the interest from the public even for there to be any pushback that it will likely pass. So I'm gonna guess it's gonna go the second round, and 3 to 4 months from now we will see it introduced to the Senate floor for a vote. Barring, the apocalypse from World War III here. And then after that gets signed, and then a month later, so midsummer or so, it is law. Seems like if you want to go to a Poly Market and place a bet, I think that would be a safe bet.
All right, so let's move on because there is plenty of fuckery to talk about, and here's some
plenty.
The UFC has announced that the DC Athletic Commission will not be overseeing the White House card. Instead, the Association of Boxing Commissions, ABC, will provide, and I quote, oversight in an advisory capacity. Now, to me, that wording sounds kind of weird, maybe a little suspect. Does it mean anything else? Does it mean anything different by definition than the duties the DC Commission would perform normally?
Well, there is some questions I have about this. There is some I guess more than questions. There's, there is some suspicion I have about this. One, it's hard for me to understand, and I'm not quite certain why they didn't use the DC Athletic Commission. Now, I know it's on federal land, and technically that's outside the Athletic Commission of Washington, D.C.'s, their
purview?
Their area of purview, yes, their domain. But you think you'd get a waiver and you'd bring in just the Athletic Commission to oversee it. Instead, they're going this route where they're bringing in the ABC. And this was raised by an article by Boxing Insider himself, Larry Goldberg. So he wrote an article about the ABC basically becoming a national commission. Now, again, if you follow the show and you listen to our episode where we talked about the Professional Boxing Amendment Act, which was the bill that was intended to follow up the Ali Act to improve it, there's long been an ideal in boxing to create a national commission to oversee all the athletic commissions. That's long been a dream. And this seems in some ways, between this and the Ali Act, seems to be setting up something like a national commission, because if you read the new version of the Ali Act, it gives a lot of responsibility to the ABC itself over the bill, over responsibility of enforcement. And the ABC itself really has no power currently. It is a trade association representing all the athletic commissions. All the power is really technically in the athletic commission's hands currently. The athletic commissions are the ones that suspend fighters. The athletic commission is the one that conduct tests. What the ABC came to an agreement on is, like, if one athletic commission, one state suspends a boxer or MMA fighter, all of them are going to enforce that suspension. We're going to agree to honor each other's suspensions. But the ABC of itself doesn't have power. And if you read the text of the new Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act, you notice that some of the responsibilities, many of them, are laid on the ABC, giving it powers of enforcement, powers of, conducting some sort of investigation, tests, things like that, which never was under the ABC authority before. So now we get to this DC show, and instead of using the DC Athletic Commission and just working how they often do out of the country, as people realize, the UFC kind of handles their own sanctioning, basically acting as their own athletic commission, but they usually bring staff from the states. The other promoters do this too, is to kind of make it legitimate. So Bellator for years, and I think PFL still does, they use Mike Mazzulli's Mohegan Sun staff. The UFC for years, when they traveled, they'd bring people from the Nevada Athletic Commission, use their standards, their rules as their rules when they're in places without an athletic commission. Here, though, instead of bringing in a state athletic commission, they're using the ABC to fill the gap itself, and that seems like maybe a test run or a case. In some ways, that's what I'm assuming this is, kind of a test run for the ABC doing this new function, and so you have to start asking, why are they doing this? And again, you can't help but get a little suspicious, because we are dealing with TKO and everything goes their way, and they're having a whole fucking bill introduced for them specifically. So what would be the purpose? Well, it is somewhat interesting that this is not an official position of the ABC. It's not a federally mandated National Boxing Commission, a federal boxing commission. There's various names they introduced over the years: the American Boxing Commission, the Boxing Commission of the USA. But basically a national boxing commission, like they want to do with the Professional Boxing Amendment Act, that would oversee all the states. It's not official. It's not set, mandated by the federal government. The current administrations don't staff it, which I'm sure a lot of people are happy, because if you don't like the Trump administration, you'd be nervous about him staffing it. But then another administration come in, and that's why I think they're kind of working this way, because if those were staffed as federal appointments by an administration, well, you might have less sway in future administrations. But because you have a monopoly in boxing, or not yet in boxing, but you have a monopoly in mixed martial arts with the UFC, you have a monopoly in pro wrestling with WWE, and those are two of the three pillars upon which athletic commissions get their revenue, and you're trying to build a monopoly in boxing, you can pretty much dictate to the state commissions. And so you would rather have this national commission staffed by the state commissions that are beholden to you than you would want them federally appointed officials. So I think that's my guess. I could be wrong, but that's where my suspicion lies, is they are building basically a national commission to override the state commissions that give them a problem, but doing it in a way where they get to influence who staffs, who hold positions on this technically a national commission, the ABC board that's going to govern the serve as a de facto athletic commission. So that's my suspicion. What's going on? We'll have to wait and see if that becomes true. But if it ends up being true, it'll probably be too late to do anything about it. So we should be on the lookout for that.
So obviously, this seems like a conflict of interest. And maybe when Andy Foster is directly asked if he plans on taking a position with TKO in some capacity, if he says no, maybe he's telling the truth?
Well, it's a possibility. Now, the commission itself is not, I wouldn't say, is a conflict of interest. I think that where the conflict of interest could be is if you are staffing it with people that have getting a benefit from their states, whatever, from your promotion. So there's the conflict of interest for me would come into many forms. It's one is like the Andy Foster rumors. Will there be a pot of gold for you? Is there a quid pro quo? Is there some benefit to you when you leave the state athletic commission, whatever? Are you going to, in other words, go work for the UFC, right? That's obviously if you are going to go work for the TKO or whatever on some level, that's a conflict of interest. Another possible conflict of interest are you going to be the people put in charge of this national commission?
That's what I'm thinking.
Are those people put in charge of the national commission? Is it a conflict of interest because they can serve their states that way because they represent those states and they can actually benefit the states that they represent over those other states? That's another potential conflict of interest. The other thing to keep on the lookout, if this becomes something of a permanent gig that gets some sort of authority, and I don't know how it would happen, but it is possible that somehow, that these positions are certified and partly paid perhaps by TKO. There might be maybe they make a mechanism where they're taxed or whatever. But they could, there's TKO again. They're going to potentially have 3 monopolies going forward, or three companies with overwhelming market power in their sports going forward. They could afford to pay large amounts to the athletic commissions, especially if they thought by doing that, those athletic commissioners were beholden to them. Because one thing I think they don't want to do is they do not want to become like, let's say, the NFL or whatever, where the sport is governed by a body that is not the state, that then they can be responsible then for lawsuits and all types of stuff. They're not given immunity the way if you have a state athletic commission. If the state approves of an action like fighting and stuff, you have no leg to stand on. You can't sue the state. And you can't really sue the promoter that did the event because the state sanctioned it. They're the ones that approved it. So that's why I think they're going to always want the state to be involved. But this, potentially, I don't even think it's at the point where you have to put on a tinfoil hat. It seems, much more plausible than that. But it's at the point where they can build basically a state-run athletic commission that is much more beholden to them than it would otherwise. And to them, that's a positive.
Well,
I shouldn't even say state-run. A state-run, I meant federally state. A federally run that oversees the states, that supersedes them, that is beholden to them. Oh, that's like a dream scenario for them.
That's why I think that maybe Andy Foster might actually be telling the truth, because I believe at one point they asked him directly and he said no. And maybe he's telling the truth because maybe he's not going directly to work for TKO. Maybe he's angling for this position that you are talking about, because every word you said sounds so ridiculously plausible to me. Possible. Like, I would say that it's almost a given at this point. No fuckery is beyond this company. All right.
Yeah, I know. I mean, and a national commission is something I've always thought would be great.
But not in this way.
Yeah, if it's not mandated under, if legislation is not voted on to enact it, and there's not means by which it's is truly independent, well, that's not what I'd like.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Ooh! Okay, the face!